My name is John Wright. I'm with HEP Data, and on behalf of all of us on the team here at HEP, we do want to extend a warm welcome to everyone. Just a quick little background and a few administrative things. HEP's been working with nonprofits over 15 years now, and for those of you who don't know us, we specialize in finding wealthy prospects, employment information, and extensively work with corporate matching gifts. But there's a couple of administrative details I'd like to go over with you. We'll not be working you too hard. You do have a couple of responsibilities, though. Number one, keep warm wherever you are. And if you do get knocked off on either the audio or the screen portion, you can just call back in or click on the link and rejoin the webinar. If you hear an echo, you may want to turn off speakers on your PC, and that's usually the culprit. We will be recording the session today and have it up on our website at hepdata.com in the Learning Center. Just by way of background, there's about 30 plus webinars there on all different topics. A lot of them, of course, are on matching gifts. And you do have the capability to ask questions today. You'll see a place on your screen where you can send questions along, and Molly and I will certainly try to answer those before the end of the session today. So without further ado, I want to just quickly introduce Molly Wasco. Molly is the professor and chairman of the University of Alabama at Birmingham, the IT department, and she also served as chief technical officer for a company called InDegree, and prior to that was a professor at Florida State University in their MIS department. So without further ado, Molly, take it away.
Great, thanks John. Well, welcome everybody. I'm so glad you could join us this afternoon. It's my pleasure to get to talk to you about one of my favorite topics, which is this combination of high tech and high touch. So how do you actually transform data into actionable insights? And so just a little bit more about my background. So as John mentioned, I'm a professor. My PhD is actually in management information systems, and my area of specialty is looking at this intersection between digital and social networks, and then how to leverage digital trace data to improve impacts of organizations. And so I got started with actually tracking alumni as part of my role in the academic unit. So about 10 years ago, actually it was right at 10 years ago, a new online networking site emerged called LinkedIn, and so I thought this would be a great opportunity for a research project and had all of my MBA students connect to me as part of their assignments. And then what I quickly realized was that after about 2 or 3 years, I had the largest alumni network at FSU with the most accurate data, and so people started coming to me. So I co-founded this company called InDegree with one of my MBAs to help universities and other nonprofits leverage some of these social media sites to build better relationships with their constituents. So it's been very interesting to be able to work across these academic boundaries and across industry boundaries. I've really enjoyed it. So just quickly, the agenda for today, I want to talk about something called information overload, which is what most of us are experiencing right now. And then I want to talk about data and the role of data when it's combined with your organization's actual strategy and goals. Then we'll talk about how to prioritize your data needs and how to know when to acquire data. Talk quickly about some different methods for how you can source data, and then of course ending up with how to get to actionable insights from your data. As John mentioned, you guys are welcome to ask questions. Just type them in the chat box and we'll try and answer as many as possible. So first of all, what is information overload? Information overload's the inability to make effective decisions caused by the presence of too much information. And it creates actually this interesting paradox for us. So when I ask people, how many of you feel like you're actually making effective decisions? we're pretty lukewarm. We're like, we're kind of making effective decisions. And then when I ask, well, how many of you feel like you have enough information? And then the answer is always, well, we have way too much information. The data sources available out there make it very difficult for us to make effective decisions. So it's kind of this paradox of more information, that more information doesn't necessarily lead to better decision making, because now we have so much information it's hard to know where to turn. And so people become paralyzed and aren't necessarily making the best decisions because they're overwhelmed by the data. So this is really where analytics comes in. It's the process of actually transforming the data you have into insights for better decision making. And so, what we also find in organizations is that just because you're really, really busy doesn't mean that you are actually highly engaged or engaging with your constituents. But just feel like we're so busy. So, given that we have limited time and resources, how do we really know that we are making an impact and that we're making the right impact? And are we measuring that? And so it's this idea that you have to make investments in data and analytics based on your strategy to actually try and have an impact, and being able to measure whether or not you are making progress towards that impact. So why do we even care about data? About 25% of your data goes bad each year. And so it's this constant struggle that you have of trying to keep your data updated. But then errors in your data significantly hamper your job efficiency. It reduces your labor productivity by 20% by just having errors in your data. Lots of organizations are dealing with duplicate records, which results in multiple mailings, multiple emails, and your constituents find that really annoying. And then also, you can't effectively segment. So, which audience should get which mailing and which messaging, which wastes your time and efforts, and it leads to major errors. So there are three common types of errors that we like to talk about. The first is the type 1 error. It's the dilemma of the lost alumni or the lost constituent, that you can't ask support from people that you don't even know. And so what we find, as soon as those students graduate, they toss the cap in the air, and then it's very hard to track them down. So, but it's a lost relationship that we can no longer leverage. There's a potential there, but we don't know where they are. The type 2 error is not asking the right things from the people you do know. So you have accurate data about them, but you don't have enough information to know what is the right ask for this person. How do they feel a relationship to us? What is their giving capability? And so we make the ask, but it's not the wrong ask for that specific constituent. And then there's the type 3 error about knowing when to ask. And this is where wealth tracking comes in. It's making the right ask to the right people, but at the wrong time. And so for this type of strategy, you really need that real-time data. So type 1, type 2, type 3 errors, all of those result from a lack of data or a lack of accurate data. And so a good analytics program actually starts with your business strategy. What is your advancement organization's strategy for analytics? What is the outcome that you're actually trying to achieve? So there are different outcomes that you could be looking for. The first one is to improve your operational efficiency. So are you doing things as efficiently as possible in your office, and which has a big impact on productivity. Another strategy is to try and enhance the constituent or donor experience. That's more of a relationship type of strategy. So the investments that you make to achieve operational efficiency won't necessarily achieve or enhancing the constituent experience. So depending on your strategy, you may make investments in different areas. And then, of course, a third strategy is to increase fundraising, increase the revenue of your operation. So once again, these things are related, but investments in one area won't necessarily have payoffs in the other three. So that's why defining your strategy, what it is you're trying to actually accomplish, is so critical. But the other thing you have to keep in mind is this strategy actually supported by an executive sponsor in your senior management team? Everybody has to be aligned with what the strategy is and the outcomes you're trying to achieve, because as long as there's no accountability within your organization, then it's very hard, or you can't do it without clear goals. People have to know what they're trying to accomplish. So the other thing with strategic alignment is that in order to successfully implement a strategy, you have to integrate three things. You have to integrate your people with your processes, with your technology. These things have to be aligned in order to manage your data effectively and efficiently. So all of you guys have probably had the experience that just because the technology exists, it doesn't mean that your organization is going to be able to adopt it effectively, that you have to actually make sure you have alignment. So it doesn't make a lot of sense to invest in a lot of technology for your data analytics if you have people who don't want to use the technology. It's not going to be successful. Same thing with your processes. If you have current processes in place that are aligned towards reaching out to people in specific ways, maybe it's paper-based, then investments in more technology are not going to help you with that. And so all three of these areas are balanced by who has the power in your organization. So if the people in power want to see investments in one direction, that's how you're going to see it take place. So there have been so many times in organizations where I've seen them invest in the latest and greatest technology, spend a lot of money, but then they never get any return on that investment because it's not a technology issue. It's not necessarily a data issue. It's the alignment between what you are investing in with your technology, but it's got to balance with the people you have and their capabilities and what they value, the processes for how you do things in your organization, and of course, who are the power stakeholders in your organization, because they're going to drive basically the culture of this entire system. Another thing that you need to think about is this idea behind shared systems. And this is more specific to the university setting, but all of us are in need of better data and more accurate data. So I am here. I reside in the academic units. My data needs are I need to know where my graduates land jobs after graduation. And I'm really most interested in like that 5 to 10 year time frame, because most of your academics units will have to report outcomes. This is especially important for graduate schools and graduate programs. Are you actually placing people in the fields in which they get their degrees? And so we have significant data needs about how to track people, but it's really in that 5-year time frame. And we want to be able to demonstrate, to report that students who get our degrees are actually working in their fields. Career Services has very unique data needs. They're required to report where students land job across the university 6 months after graduation. So their constituent bases, they really want to know where people land that first job. They're not so interested in people 5 years out, 10 years out, so they invest in systems that effectively track that first career, first job placement. Then, of course, Alumni Services, they want to invest in technologies that, build relationships. So how do we make sure we maintain connections with everybody who graduates from our university and that they come back and feel affiliated? And then, of course, on the development side, their primary goal is to really target who are our high-end potential donors that we need to develop these stronger relationships with. So we all have data needs, but they're all a little bit different. And so finding a way to leverage systems across these different units in higher education is one of our major challenges. And this is one of these tensions are what bring about something that you guys refer to consistently as these shadow databases. So if I can't get the data that I need from alumni services or development, I go out and I create my own database. Same thing with career services, same thing on this side. And so people start creating their own shadow databases, which means typically you don't have one view of your alumni base at all, and people will have different systems with different information. So when you're looking at your data needs, it's very helpful to think of this model. Your data will vary in terms of its accuracy from low to high and also its completeness. And so once again, this needs to align back to your strategy. But where does your organization reside in terms of these quadrants? So on your accuracy scale and your completeness scale. So down here at the low end, we call this a fractional data strategy. This is a starting point for most organizations that they have some information, but the goal for all of you should be able to move forward from here. And you need to pick direction. Are you going to go for more accuracy, more completeness, or are you going to try and strive for both? Typically what we see with fractional organizations with a fractional strategy, there's high turnover in the office, and so you could have done a data acquisition or some type of investment in technology, but then there was turnover, you didn't have anybody to take over the system. Low data sophistication, so not having a good grasp of the different data sources and a technology infrastructure that would support actually collecting some of this data. And then, vendor quality. So where are you getting your data and how good is the quality of it? So this next quadrant is low accuracy but high completeness. So what this means is you have a lot of data. So most of your constituents in your database have some information about them, but you really have very little confidence as to whether or not it's accurate. So organizations in this quadrant typically are relying on archival data, so maybe data from your registration system that was highly accurate at the time of graduation but hasn't been updated. So another way you could be in this quadrant is you have data enhancements, but there's very little data validation, and so you're not confident that the information that people have put in there have really done a good job thoroughly vetting that data. And then you end up in this quadrant because you lack the contact information you need on constituents and a feedback mechanism for allowing them to actually update their own data. And this is, it gets at this tension between, do you want control, high control over your information systems, which means nobody can enter data except you, the expert, and you vet it for high accuracy, or you allow lots of people to touch the system, which means you're not really sure what the data sources are. All right, this quadrant where you have low completeness but very high accuracy, these are for a strategy where you really want to focus on a small group of constituents. And this could be a very valid strategy. So say you're not interested in, graduates between 1996 and today, but you really want to know for the people who graduated before 1996, or maybe a constituent base within a specific job title range, that you want to focus on collecting information about those folks. And the other thing with accuracy, maybe you don't want everything about them, but what you want to do is keep up to date on a few specific attributes. And so once again, this could be a very good strategy, high confidence, but you don't have everybody in your database. And then of course, if you're really going to have an analytics program that yields good results, you need to be up here in this quadrant, so about 80% accuracy with about 80% completeness. And so once you achieve this level though, you have to make significant investments in making sure that your data stays updated. So if you're relying on a highly intensive analytics program, that the data that you're running your analytics on really has to be both complete and accurate. And so, the key to this is data management and governance. So making sure you have very clear policies in place for how you're going to manage the data, how you're going to update the data, who has access to the data. So one of the first steps you guys need to go through is actually defining for yourselves what is a complete record. And the more shops I talk to, the more they have differing definitions. So there isn't an industry standard for what is a complete record, but for your own shop, you guys should define for yourselves, what do you call complete? And so there are three different areas that you can consider. The first one is the communications data. Do you have information about how to reach somebody? So maybe your definition of a complete record is an up-to-date email address, an up-to-date phone number, and an updated address. So, make investments in collecting data that actually yield this information, accurate information, how to reach somebody. So, but keep in mind these things are constantly changing. As people change jobs, they typically will change emails when they move, the phone number and address. So you have to be constantly vigilant that what you have is accurate and up to date. In addition, there's this bucket we called intelligence data. So not only can you reach them, but what do you actually know about them? So this is where well screening comes in, and employment information, industry information is very, very helpful. So you have, in addition to the communications data, some intelligence data about your constituents that help you refine your analytics and target and segment. And then finally, we have this bucket we call research data. So these data sources include things like a LinkedIn URL, other social media sites and their URLs, and then sites like crowdfunding. So it's kind of the third layer. This is a nice to have. These probably are your must-haves. And so as you define, go after bucket one. Try to get complete there, and then make additional investments in intelligence data, and then investments in research data. So you don't have to do everything at once, but get started defining something, move to get accuracy in that, and then move on to the next thing. So what data do you actually need? So here we talked about the contact information. Can you reach out to this person? Can you use a method that people actually want to use? And one of the interesting things, now I don't have it in the graphic, is cell phones. So, on the last slide I talked about how phone numbers are constantly changing. Cell phones are now much more durable, and tend to transfer with the person, even though they may move state to state. That it's so hard for people to change and update their cell phone numbers because there are so many people they have to contact. A lot of the times that will just stick with them. The other thing you want to know is their career data. So how are they progressing in their careers? And there's lots of interesting things you can do with career information. So it's not just, are they a high development prospect, but how can you continue to develop and nurture relationships with these people even after graduation? So for us on the academic unit side, we love hearing about successful alumni who are 5 and 10 years into the career, because we like guest speakers coming back into the classroom. We like having mentors coming in and working with career services to help our current students get ready to land their first job. And so really trying to work with your academic units to engage these people is a win-win for everybody. We also have our internal data systems, typically from your registration database or some other sources. And then there are these external sources of data that have emerged where people are just self-selecting to provide information out there. So you might find this table somewhat helpful. So not only does it apply to alumni, but you can also apply it to constituents. But when you think about, here are some of the major different sources of data, a description of it, and then some pros and cons. So of course, all of our campuses have these formal systems, some type of campus ERP, enterprise resource system, including things like student registration, financial aid, faculty and staff HR systems. So some big pros about this, they're highly accurate because there are official campus systems. It's also self-reported and validated, and there's a known affiliation. So with the formal systems, we know this is a student in this program who graduated this year. Some of the cons, that data doesn't update, and so after separation from the organization, then there's no way to know a current state of that constituent. Another issue is data integration and data ownership. Do you actually migrate that data into a development system or a shared system? Will your registrar's office actually allow you to do that, and how frequently? And are there rules in place for who actually owns that data? So that could be a struggle as well. In addition to our formal systems, we have lots of informal systems. So athletic programs, season ticket holders, we have these PBS, TV, radio memberships, academic units constantly are holding professional development activities. So these are informal systems that are tracked at different units across campus. One of the big pros about this kind of data is that there's a personal connection with constituents that you can identify. The cons about this, it's very hard to collect this kind of information. So I have 500 working executives that I've provided professional education to, but it's sitting in an Excel spreadsheet on my hard drive that it's not shared with anybody else across campus because it's not part of the formal registration system. Even if I were to share it, it's difficult for you guys to add on your side to existing systems because where's the placeholder for that? And then also, if it's external to the system, you guys have to deal with it with a lot of manual processing. So we have a direct source of data. This is where alumni and other constituents currently can just come in and directly update their information via a website or a mobile app, or maybe this is done through a call center solicitation. So this is a great source of data because it's volunteered. You have an affinity with this person. They care enough about you that they actually take the time to update their information, and it's from a trusted source, the person themselves. Some of the cons is, it decays over time if you don't have them consistently updating, and we get really low response rates. So it's a great source of data, but it doesn't really help us, reach all of our constituents. We have third-party data, so HEP data is a good example of this, where you partner with some third party and they pull data from their sources. One of the nice things about this, it's passive and non-invasive, so you can collect information from your constituents. You can get multiple attributes, and it doesn't take any effort on the constituents' part. Some of the cons, depending on who you source your data from, it's uncertain in terms of how accurate it is. In some cases, it could be expensive. And once again, you have the data integration issue. How are you going to migrate this data back into your system to get the most value out of it? And then, of course, we have this bucket that's really emerged over the past 6 years. It's what alumni post about themselves and make publicly available through social media. So alumni and constituents are out there posting about all kinds of things that are important to them. So this is what we refer to as this digital trace data, that you have this wealth of access to information about people via social media. It's a much higher percentage source. So a lot of our constituents, especially the younger ones, are out there, and you can collect multiple attributes about your constituents. Some of the challenges, of course, data integration. This is very unstructured data. How would you get a history of tweets to make into, integrated back into your data system? That it's a big challenge. So effectiveness, you can quickly exceed the cost of trying to collect as much information as possible, but are you really getting any analytics value out of that data? And where's the sweet spot in the middle where you're collecting just enough to maximize your effectiveness? And then, once again, it's just really hard to turn this type of data into structured data that you can analyze effectively. So I'm sure most of you are aware of LinkedIn. It's probably the #1 data source for the value. So out on LinkedIn, people post where they work. They post, their affiliation back to the university. They post their affiliations with nonprofits. And so there are a couple of ways you can get data out of LinkedIn. So the first way is what we call a forward match. This is what you do when you ever use the advanced search feature on LinkedIn. And so if you log into LinkedIn, that up here at the top you can see this advanced search feature, which then brings up these different areas that you can search on. And so you enter the first and last name of the person you're looking for. It also is incredibly helpful to enter the name of the school or keyword if there's an affiliation. You can also enter a location. So if you're not at a university but some other type of nonprofit and you know somebody's zip code, then their first name, last name, zip code is also very effective. So when you hit search on these search criterias, it brings you to a match. So that's called the forward match. Some of the big advantages to this, it's highly accurate because you're doing a single search at a time. Also, you know you have a match because when you look at the school education information in the profile, that you can compare it to what you have in your own system to make sure, yes, this is a graduate with an English degree from 1996, so you have a direct match. So that's the benefit of going with a forward match. So let me go ahead and bring on LinkedIn. So this is me on LinkedIn. This is live. So you just come up to your advanced search feature, and then you put in the first name, and then you get this direct match. So having 3 points of matching data, first, last, and school, gives you a very accurate forward match. The other way, and I'm sure you guys have tried this, is just putting in your school. And if you have a trip somewhere, so you put in the zip code of where you're going to go, and then this will bring up all of the alumni you have in that geographic area. So the other thing to keep in mind is the results that you see will be different based on how you're connected to people. So these are the results that I see. So that's the forward match using the advanced search features. But when you look at an individual's profile, you get typically a great summary talking about what's important to people. You get this history of what they do in terms of their career, types of skills, and then their education profile so you know how to match them back. And then if you keep scrolling down, you can look at the groups. So this actually gives you a really good idea of the types of affinities that this person has. So it generates a wealth of great information for you. Now you have to decide, does it make sense for you to download this data and put it into your system, or is it good enough to have the LinkedIn URL and maybe a couple of data points that you can use for your analytics? So another way to get data out of LinkedIn that's becoming more prevalent is this browser-based scrape method. So this is a very different approach for how you collect the data. So what typically happens in this situation is you put in the name of the university, you just put it into a basic Google search using some script, and then it will pull out everybody with a LinkedIn profile that has made it publicly available. And, there's some programming to actually download it into an Excel spreadsheet for you. So some of the pros of this method, it's really, really simple to scrape, and it's not very expensive. You probably have some IT people in your shop that can do this very, very easily. If you Google LinkedIn scraper with Google search, you'll bring up lots of methods for how you can do it. If you go to YouTube, there's also lots of resources for how you do it. So some vendors will actually do this for you if you don't want to and clean it up and send it to you in Excel, but you really don't need a vendor to be able to do this. So some of the cons of this is this wildcard search yields really low accuracy. So you're going to have, it can scrape out everybody with a public profile that has the name of your university in their profile, but you have no idea how you're related back to that person. Also, depending on your university name, you could also have pretty low accuracy. So lots of versions of St. John's, St. Thomas. If you have that type of name, it's going to be very, very hard. Also, to give you an example from FSU, we have students that put in FSU, they put in Florida State, they put in Florida State College of Business. So depending on the term you actually use for the search, you could get very, very different results. The other thing we find that lots of people will put a university affiliation into their education profile, but they won't have a degree from that university. So if you're matching back to your registrar system that actually has, here are people who completed degrees, you're not going to have a record of them back into your systems. Another thing, if people just take a single class or they take executive education, they could put that in their LinkedIn profile. The other difficulty with this is you can't do a partial search. So for instance, I'm very interested in my alumni from the Collat School of Business. I don't really need to know data about public health and English. Using this method, though, there's no way to be able to just pull out a partial group unless the people you're looking for actually wrote in Collat School of Business, and from what we've seen, very few people actually do that. So those are some of the cons. And then for those of you who are interested in how to access the scripts, here's the website right there. And so this has actually raised lots of questions in your industry about, what is feasible versus what should you be doing. And so Jennifer Fila has a really good blog up here about that you can go check out. But it's this idea, scraping out of Google, is it legal? Well, it's certainly, you're technically capable to do it. LinkedIn has a user agreement, and the interpretation has been as long as you're not logged into LinkedIn while you do this and you're just scraping out of Google, then it's perfectly fine. You guys need to be comfortable within your own shops that, if it got out that you are using this method to collect data about your constituents, would your constituents feel comfortable with this? So with the forward match, that's actually the source of data that, in conversations with LinkedIn, that they have said is appropriate. But once again, it's taking a couple of data pieces on a select group of people that you're trying to match, not that you're trying to scrape data. So The technical capability is there. There are pros and cons to each type of data sourcing, and so, but you guys have to be comfortable within your own shops for how you do it. So another thing you guys need to do is always be vigilant for new sources of data. And so one of the interesting applications that we've seen emerge is this idea of crowdfunding. And this has been incredibly successful for us. So if you guys don't currently do crowdfunding, you might want to think about doing it. So we use our crowdfunding site basically to put up micro projects, that we want funding for. Typically, they're between $10,000 and $15,000. And we have some type of constituent base that's passionate about it, and what they do is they tap into their own social networks to try and get people to give micro gifts, so $20, $50. So one, the funding is really, really nice, but from my perspective, the really cool thing about this is the back-end data that you get. So you get to see on the donor wall exactly who is donating. You can see in what amounts, and you can track them back to see what kind of affiliation that you have with them. So we've used this site, excuse me, we had a pretty good donor prospect, but we never had any success actually convincing them to give. And it was interesting. So the approach we were using, UAB has a big medical center. So we were trying to get the donor passionate about investing in medical cures. And it was, he didn't really go for that. But then one day he showed up on the wall, and what he invested in, a small amount, but it was our innovation and entrepreneurship programs. He was very passionate about this area of innovation. And so once we realized that that was the affinity this person had, we were much better able to direct our approach to this relationship. And so, one of the neat things about this is, yes, you get the fundings, typically smaller amounts and small gifts, but you learn a wealth of information and you expand your donor base to include parents and neighbors and people that you didn't know were passionate about your school or nonprofit, but are interested in giving. So, but some things to consider when we talk about sources of data, that which department or unit is going to pay for it. So we are in a very interesting situation here at UAB. We have our career services department is very motivated to get their career placement data as complete and accurate as possible. And so they've worked with the academic units to get all of the students signed up onto LinkedIn. And we use LinkedIn to actually figure out 6 months out where have they landed that job. So, but that's information that stays right with career services. It's not shared across the university. So knowing which department or unit's going to pay for it and invest in it and maintain it is a big question for most shops. Who's going to actually own it? So this is another question. So is it going to reside in career services? Is it going to be shared across the university? How will it be maintained? Who's going to be responsible for the implementation and maintenance? How is it going to align with our existing systems? And then one of the key takeaways I want you guys to have about the talk is, what is actually the return on investment? There's no end to the number of things we could invest in. The question we need to keep coming back to is, what should we invest in? And what drives that is really going back to the strategy I talked about earlier. Is it going to improve our shop's operational efficiency? Is it going to improve our engagement with our constituents, or is it going to improve, our fundraising capability? So whatever you're looking at making an investment, make sure that you can tie it directly back to some type of return and back to your strategy. And so, these are key things to consider.
Molly, we had a question. I don't know if you want to take it now or you want to wait until the end.
So This is actually the last slide, so why don't I just finish this up and then we'll go directly to questions.
Okay, sounds good.
So what do you get with analytics? So you have good data, but you're not raising the amount of money you think you should be. So this is where analytics will come in. How do you target and segment to make sure that you're trying to reach, an end goal of development in terms of dollars? What's the return on investment for data management? So this is something that you're constantly struggling with. Are you viewed as a cost center versus a revenue center? And how do you engage in that conversation? Can you turn this question of, if you invest in acquiring this data, it will yield this much additional revenue for you? Because that's what's going to make sense to people. Do we acquire new donors by updating their records? So, that gets back to, do you want to increase accuracy and completeness? And what are the steps that you're going to take to actually get to that goal? And then keep in mind that you can't hold people accountable without clear goals. As long as there's confusion in the shop about what people need to be doing, then you can't say, well, you're not doing your job. So this is where having policies and procedures written down, articulated, and shared with everybody makes a big difference, because this is what's really going to drive how you make additional investments. Another thing to keep in mind, though, is when you set a goal, it may have very strange unintended consequences. So people have a tendency, actually all people in organizations, if you set a goal of a dollar amount, people are going to figure out how to maximize that, which may lead to some bad behaviors in other places. So, do we look at short-term giving over long, valued relationships with constituents? And then, really the key thing for you guys is you're losing your budget dollars each year, but you have to provide the same level or better service, and how are you going to do that? And so hopefully with this talk, you'll have some other ways to think about, well, what we've typically thought about is high tech is the opposite of high touch. That investments in technology means you're not investing in relationships. Well, we need to change that attitude to see it's not either or, it's both. Clearly, our constituents think high tech is a great way to extend and expand relationships, because we see them out there doing it in social media, out there filling out their LinkedIn profiles, engaging with others on our Facebook sites. So we have to rethink this idea that it's not high tech or high touch. You can have both. All right, so with that, let's go ahead and take some questions.
Okay, great, Molly. Thank you so much. That was fabulous. Yes, if any of you other folks out there have some questions, do send them along on the question box there. Question is, should we be concerned with the fact that these constituents may be able to see that we are looking at their LinkedIn profile?
So that is a great question. Let me show you what this person is talking about. So here's my profile. You have this capability right here, and depending on, so I'm just in a basic free site, that if I click here, I can see who has viewed my profile and over history. So you can see, I can see exactly. So some of them are private, but for the most part, I know who is checking out my profile. You have to actually consider that, of course, people will know this. And by the way, if you reach out to a constituent, the first place they're going to go to look for information about you is LinkedIn. So for you personally, for your professional presence, and to make sure your constituents have confidence in you, you need to make sure you have a very well done profile on LinkedIn. So the answer is yes. If you look at people, they'll be able to see that, which is perfectly fine. So the other thing is, this is a person I have no idea, but boy, they have a really cool title. I can't wait to check them out and see if there's a reason for us to connect. You know, I bet a lot of your constituents, especially if they're good prospects, would really want to reconnect with you and your organization. So they might be flattered that you're checking them out. So, but yes, people can see when you've looked at their LinkedIn profile.
Okay, and if anyone else has any questions, do send them along here. I think we're about to wrap it up then. Well,
So there was a question I get pretty frequently at conferences, and that's how often should we update our data? So, you know, if you use a service like HepData, they use the match forward techniques, so they have very high accuracy. So I think right now the accuracy rate is between 3%, 5% of errors, and so a lot of our constituents have a lot of confidence in that data and just upload it directly into their systems. But keep in mind that that data is good at one point in time. So how frequently do you need to keep updating that? Well, it depends. Probably the most important piece of data that you can get is that LinkedIn URL. As long as you have that stored in your system, along with your constituent, you can always click on that URL and get updated information. The other thing is, you know, always double check. It's a very easy click to make sure if you're reaching out to a constituent that you do have updated data. But once again, it's got to go back to that strategy. If you are in a high analytics shop where you have high accuracy, high completeness, you're trying to reach that 80%, 80%, you're going to want to update your data probably every other year. So, but if you're not as concerned with that, maybe you're more concerned with the completeness, actually having data on people and then looking up as, you know, you want to reach out to folks, then you don't have to do it as frequently. I know career services, they do it every 6 months because they've got to track the placement outcomes, and now we have to report it to a national board.
okay. Well, the one thing I will add is that, you know, the accuracy of the data when you do a match, find like employer data, for example, you know, we're matching on a number of different fields, age, degree, and name of the person, maybe an email address, and obviously the name of the school. So the accuracy of the matching data is very, very high. And, you know, false positives, if you dialed 5 years ago, you would find quite a few false positives. I don't even hear the term mentioned much anymore, to be honest with you, when I deal with nonprofits. So, but I think we'll wind it up there and
Actually,
say thank
John,
you to
let
Molly.
me just demo this really quickly. So,
okay.
You know, we demonstrated the forward match. The web scrape basically works like this, that you put in the name of a school. So I'm just using UAB, which is the truncated version. You can see we have 18,000 people that actually put UAB in their education profile. And so what happens with scraping, basically this information is pulled down into an Excel spreadsheet and handed back to the constituent. So if I use UAB, I get 17,000. If I use University of Alabama at Birmingham, I get 130. So depending on what you're using for your search terms could yield very different results. And you don't really know how to match this data back to your constituents. So this is why the forward match at the very beginning actually yields a lot of value. So, all right, I'll quit there, John.
Well, thank you so much, Molly. It was great. It really was. And I'm sure I speak for everyone saying thank you to you. And thank you all for coming. And we'll look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks again.
Thanks. Bye.